Hello, friends. I am Brenda. I'm going to explain a clear explanation about the English literature chapter after 20 years from English Ratnasagar. This is the textbook that I am having. Now, let me explain you this chapter with my reading and also the clear explanation also. Now, let me start off with the chapter. After 20 years. The person or the author who wrote this after 20 years, this chapter, is William Sidney Porter. He was from 1828 to 1910. Now, let me just tell you a few words about this chapter. Okay, now let me start off. The incident in the story takes place at around 10 p.m. along a dark, windy New York City business avenue. It begins with a policeman who discovers a man standing in the dark doorway. The man then proceeds to explain why he is there. So, you always know this chapter is taken from the New York City, and over there in the business avenue their businesses takes place, the selling and buying of goods or anything. So it takes place, incident takes place at around 10 o'clock p.m. in the night. And also in that time, I may ask you one question: what is the climate of that time? What is the climate of that period of time, that is the 10 o'clock? It is very dark, it is very windy. Two words: dark and windy. Now, the story or the chapter begins with a policeman, and he stands in the dark doorway. Before any shop he may stand, and the man then he proceeds to tell why he is there, the man from the dark who is standing in the dark. Now, let me read on the chapter. The policeman on the beat moved up the avenue impressively. The impressiveness was habitual and not for show, for spectators were few. The time was barely 10 o'clock at night, but chilly gusts of wind with a taste of rain in them had well nigh depeopled the streets. Now, I will read para by para and explain it. The policeman on the beat. Now, what do you mean by a beat? It is given as the beat means an assigned route of a policeman. The assigned route of that policeman. So, that period of time, he should go on which route? He should check whatever things. That is on beat. Moved up the avenue impressively. He was very happy, I think so. He was very happy of the day. So, he was going on impressively. The impressiveness was habitual and not for show. He doesn't want to show off his impressiveness. He was happy for himself only. Who? The policeman. For spectators were very few. The people who were in the night, always they will be sleeping, so the spectators were very few for them. The time was barely 10 o'clock at night. So the time was that time when the policeman was on beat was 10 o'clock at night. That time the climate I told you, that is dark, windy. You can add one more point, a taste of rain in them. You see well nigh depeopled. What do you mean by well nigh depeopled? Well nigh depeopled means here nearly emptied. Nearly emptied because no people in the streets. At nights they are not allowed to go and roam everywhere. Okay. Now let me go to the second para. The vicinity was one that kept early hours. Now and then, you might see the lights of a cigar store or of an all night lunch counter. But the majority of the doors belong to the business places that had long since been closed. So, the vicinity. What do you mean by vicinity? Vicinity means the neighborhood. The neighborhood was one that kept early hours. Now, what do you mean by the that kept the early hours? That kept the early hours means when people in New York, the people go for bed early. We go at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, also we stay and do the work and then go for bed. But these New York people, they go for bed early, like 7:30 in that. So you might already see the lights of a cigar store. Sometimes only you may see the cigar store. What do you mean by cigar store? Cigar means, now you know, cigarette. That unrefined form of cigarette is only cigar. That is very long, narrow, I may say. But cigarette is very short. But cigar is very long. That is used in New York. And you may see cigar store and also all night lunch counter. All night lunch counter means any hotels and all those only you may see. But all the doors may be closed. In business places, all the doors will be closed because they have to go for bed early. Next para. When about midway of a certain block, the policeman suddenly slowed his walk. In the doorway of a darkened hardware store, a man leaned with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. As the policeman walked up to him, the man spoke up quickly. So, he was walking, the policeman on beat was checking all the doors and all the things, whether they were sleeping or whether the shops were open or whether the shops were closed. All these they were seeing. So, who was seeing? The policeman was seeing. So, the policeman, he suddenly slowed his walk. He started walking slowly. And in the doorway of a darkened hardware. So, darkened hardware store means, hardware here means the machinery tools or metals, the making of metals, all these machinery tools, these are only hardware stores. You know about it, but not machinery means not computer parts, not that one, but making of metals, machinery tools, all those will be made in the hardware store. So he was standing over there, but the shop was closed and he was only standing over there. Let us see was the reason for his standing. And he was leaning. He was leaning towards the hardware store with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. So he had the unlighted cigar. I told you what do you mean by cigar. It is an unrefined form of the cigarette. It is very long, narrow. And as the policeman walked up to him, as the policeman, he was on beat now, so he was saying what was the reason for this man staying over here instead of sleeping. Because I told you why. Because in New York people go for sleep very early. So he was thinking why this man is not yet going to sleep. So he walked over there, and the man who was standing in the dark, leaning towards the hardware store, he spoke up very quickly. "It's all right, officer," he said. "I'm just waiting for a friend. It's an appointment made 20 years ago. Sounds a little funny to you, doesn't it? Well, I will explain if you would like to make certain it's all straight. About that long ago, there used to be a restaurant where this store stands. Big Joe Brady's restaurant." So, when a man spoke up quickly, as a policeman came to him. So he says, "It's all right, officer, you don't have to arrest me." Continues. His meaning is that it's all right, you don't have to arrest me, or else I don't want to go to sleep, not like that. But It was just an appointment. He was waiting for what? It was just, why was he standing in the dark? Because it was an appointment made 20 years ago. He was just waiting for his friend. How many years did the appointment go? It was made 20 years ago. Just imagine, without seeing a friend, 20 years. It is a so long time. So he makes sure that the policeman doesn't laugh at him, at the story. So sounds a little funny to you. To you here means the policeman. Doesn't it? Well, I will explain you. Means the man who is standing in the dark, he says, okay then, if it is funny for you, then I will explain you why I am standing here and what is the reason for the 20 years appointment also. Then he goes explaining, but he doesn't know he is explaining to a stranger. But if you were in that position, you would be explain. You can type it. So let us continue. About that long ago, there used to be a restaurant called as where the store stands, Big Joe Brady's restaurant. So he points out to a store and he says, there used to be a restaurant in this place where this store stands. Maybe he remembers everything. So he says the restaurant name as Big Joe Brady's restaurant. So make sure you write the spellings also correctly. Now let us continue with the policeman. Until 5 years ago, said the policeman, it was torn down then. So it remained for 5 years and then it was torn down, said the policeman. So he listened to this restaurant and he told Big Joe Brady's was there for 5 years and then it was torn down and the store was built. The man in the doorway struck a match and lit his cigar. The light showed a pale, square-jawed face with keen eyes and a little white scar near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin was a large diamond oddly set. So, let us explain this one. The man in the doorway. So, who was that man? He was standing in the doorway of the hardware store. Na? He was like just leaning towards it. So he was leaning. So that man, he struck up his cigar. He struck up his cigar. You know, I told you what is cigar also. I'm not repeating again. Okay. So he lit up his cigar. So the policeman could see his face. The policeman could see his face. How was his face? And he told the light. When he lit his cigar, the light showed his face. He had a pale, square jawed. Pale means what? Not very healthy. Not like fully whitish. Pale. Square jawed. Square means square jawed face. Square jawed. Now like this. Square. It may be any jawed face also, but he had square jawed face with keen eyes. Keen eyes means what? What do you mean by keen? Means you can write it down. Eager. Keen means keen. 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 Keen means eager. And a white scar near his right eyebrow. You know what is your right? This is my right. So my right eyebrow here was a scar. Scar means a mark. Scar means you can write it down, a mark left after an injury. If you get any injury, the mark which would be left over is only the scar. So if I ask you, explain the man from the doorway who was standing on the doorway in the dark, or anything it may be. So you have to write, the man had a pale, square-jawed face with keen eyes and a little white scar near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin was a large diamond oddly set. Now, scarf pin, to make sure your scarf doesn't go off when the wind blows, you use a scarf pin. So that scarf pin was oddly set diamond. You know, diamond is very precious metal. So that diamond, it was oddly set scarf pin. So you can tell that he was very rich by the diamond. So this was the first incident. Scarf pin was like it was a decorated pin to hold the scarf, I told you. Yes. Now let me continue. 20 years ago, Janai, said the man, I dined here at Big Joe Brady's with Jimmy Wells, my best chum and the finest chap in the world. He and I were raised here in New York, just like two brothers together. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. The next morning, I was to start for the West to make my fortune. You couldn't have dragged Jimmy out of New York. He thought it was the only place on earth. Well, we agreed that night that we would meet here again, exactly 20 years from that date and time, no matter what our conditions might be or from what distance we might have to come. We figured that in 20 years, each of us ought to have our destiny worked out and our fortunes made, whatever they were going to be. So, let us see. 20 years ago tonight. So, this he's explaining the story of he's narrating his story, I mean to say. So, 20 years ago. So, he told that it was an appointment to meet a friend who was 20 years ago back. So, here he is narrating the story which was happening 20 years ago. So let us see. 20 years ago tonight, said the man. So the man from the west said that it had been 20 years ago that he met his friend and he had dined here in this Big Joe Brady's restaurant. In this Big Joe Brady's restaurant where the store stands now. And he says who is his best chum, best chap or best friend is Jimmy Wells. So, Jimmy Wells was 18 years old, and this man who was standing in the dark the Jimmy Wells was 20 years old, and the man who was standing in the dark was 18 years old. So, they both were raised in New York only. They were living like brothers. Even though they were friends, they used to live like brothers. And when these both were up to an age, they left each other. Jimmy Wells was living in this New York only and made his fortune. But the man standing in the dark, he went to the west to make his fortune. Fortune means money. To make his wealth, to make his fortune. I told you. So they both they left each other, and this man from who was standing in the dark, or now I can name him as the man from the west because he went to the west. So he says that nobody could pull out Jimmy Wells from this New York because he thought this New York was only the place for to make him his fortune, to live his life. Okay? Now, it was only the place on earth where he could stay, but the man from the west, he went towards the west to make his fortune. And they made an appointment after 20 years, whatever conditions they may be, whatever situations they may be, whether they were poor or whether they were rich or anything, they would meet after 20 years in this place where the store stands, but before Big Joe Brady's restaurant used to stand. What was our future? After 20 years, they wanted to check themselves. So after 20 years, they wanted to meet each other. Now let us continue. It sounds pretty interesting, said the policeman. Rather a long time between meetings, though it seems to me. Haven't you heard from your friend since you left? So the policeman was eagerly listening, and he said that the story was very pretty interesting, and he also keenly he loved the story. He was listening to the story, and also he also told that 20 years is already always a long time between each others. 20 years or many years also, it is a long time. So they said, the policeman asked doubtfully, you didn't meet your friend from after that when you made the appointment? So anyone will have this doubt, not only policeman, even I have that doubt. Why? After that next day, can't you meet your friend through any through letters or through anything, any medium? You could contact now. Now let us see what would be the man from the west answer. Well, yes, for a time we corresponded, said the other. But after a year or two, we lost track of each other. You see, the West is a pretty big proposition, and I kept hustling around over it pretty lively. But I know Jimmy will meet me here if he's alive. For he always was the truest, staunchest old chap in the world. He will never forget. I came 1,000 miles to stand in this doorway or door tonight, and it's it words means it is beneficial if my old partner turns up. So the man from the west, he casually said, yes, we had the corresponding towards, but 1 or 2 weeks we had, 1 or 2 years we had the corresponding through letters and all. But again they left each other, and then they lost the track between each other. The man from the west, he had a very good wealth. He did very he was boasting about himself, he was praising about himself. He was telling that he had done pretty well in the west. He had done very excellent. He had done excellent in the west, and he made his fortune. And also, I kept hustling around over it pretty lively. What do you mean by this? Kept hustling around over it pretty lively. This means that he traveled around a lot of hectic life. He had a lot of hectic life. He had a lot of difficulties during his life, during the West. When he was in West, he had a lot of hardships. He had a lot of difficulties, and all those. Now, but I know Jimmy will meet me if he is alive. So he had a confirm in his mind that if Jimmy was alive today, he would pakka meet him today. Jimmy would meet this man from the west today. After 20 years, they made this appointment to 10 o'clock at Big Joe Brady's. They had their dinner and they went to each other. They went to the west and one went to in the New York only. And he was sure that his friend would turn up. He had come 1,000 miles from the west towards New York, and if his old partner Jimmy Wells would turn up and come to him and greet him and tell him some things, how he has done his fortune, it would be very happy for him also now, from the man from the west. Even for us, our parents just turn up for us, they greet us or they praise us. It would be very happy for us now. Now let us do the next part. The waiting man pulled out a handsome watch, the lids of it set with small diamonds. 3 minutes to 10, he announced. It was exactly 10 o'clock when we parted here at the restaurant door. So, the waiting man or the man from the west, he was opening, he had from his pocket, he pulled out a watch which was set. The lids were set with diamonds, small diamonds. Yes, it was very costly. So first incident where he was very wealthy was his scarf pin with large diamond which was already set. And the second incident is that he pulled out his watch and he saw that the lids of the watch was all set with small diamonds. And he saw the time and he said it was 3 minutes to 10 o'clock. Means they made their whole appointment or their breakup at 10 o'clock. So it was 3 minutes for 10. Did pretty well out west, didn't you? Asked the policeman. You bet. I hope has done half as well. He was a kind of plodder, though good fellow as he was.